Normally we do these interviews in a studio in person, but obviously we're doing them via Skype because of what's going on in the world. But the plus side is I get to be at home. So I have my pets. It's bring your daughter to work day. I wanted you to meet my snake. I thought
she's pretty.
She's really excited.
Yeah. She, what, about 2 years old, 3 years old?
She's 6 years old, actually. I got her in
6 years old.
Yeah, I got her in 2016, and I was told she was 2 years old at that time. She's pretty small. She's not like the snakes, you have the advanced snakes in your career, but her name is White Snake for the obvious reason, her being white. And I just figured, she's very excited, as you can see, to meet, like a member of snake royalty, like the king of the snakes. It's like you and Slash. I'd love to talk some snakes with you because you've had some famous ones. You've had like Cobra Winfrey and Julius Squeezer, and I know you had one.
Eva Marie Snake. We had.
And you had one named Christopher that I've read you've done whole interviews about.
Well, there's so many great stories when you're carrying snakes around, the big boa constrictors, because they were so much a part of the band that you just let them roam around. You didn't really put them in and I think they actually got the idea that they were in the show, and just hanging out. So I'd be doing an interview with somebody, and all of a sudden this great big thing would come up, like this, and get over there. But I mean, they get loose in hotels. They would wrap around radiators, and you'd have to get a rat, to get her out, just to hold the rat out there so she'd smell it and come out. We had one go down a toilet in Knoxville, Tennessee, and came up in Charlie Pride's toilet about 2 weeks later.
Like the country singer Charlie Pride?
Yeah.
How did he react to that?
Well, I don't know if he was shaving or sitting on the toilet at the time, but this thing's head was as big as my hand. I mean, Yvonne, she was our biggest snake, and the sweetest. She was the nicest one. But if you're sitting on the toilet and a snake comes up between your legs while you're sitting there, that's going to you're going to have some kind of traumatic reaction to that.
Yeah. Do you have any other fun stories about going on the road with snakes? I'd love to hear them.
It used to be before 9/11. We would just put them right next to us. Cheryl and I would sit, and put the snake right in a cage, like people have their kittens and people have their puppies, and we'd have our boa constrictor. And honestly, nobody said anything about it. It was no big deal. Now, when you go to Europe, you have to have a permit in every country to have the snakes, so it's really hard to use them anymore. In the States we can use them, but it's just much, much harder. The best one though was we had a albino python, and her name was Popcorn because she was a beautiful white, yellow, pink eyes, and they actually are the nicest ones for some reason. And we put her in her cage, and a heating pad on the bottom. And it was feeding time, so we dropped a couple of rats in. Next morning, I get up and I open the box, and the rats are gone, but also the heating pad is gone, and the electric wire is coming out of her mouth, and it's still plugged in. She swallowed the heating pad. It had blood on it, so they're blind. They're fairly blind. So they're going by smell. She swallowed the heating pad, and it was still plugged in. And so I called the vet, and they said, unplug the. Well, yeah, we unplug it, and he says she'll swallow the whole thing. Cut it so she doesn't swallow everything. So we cut the wire and everything. And in about 2 days, her nose started bleeding a little bit. And I said, okay, she's not digesting this. They took her in, opened her up, took the heating pad out, zipped her back up, and she's in a petting zoo now, and she's doing fine.
Oh, but, I'm glad I had happy ending.
Jay Leno heard the story, and he says, you know you're too old to rock when your snake swallows your heating pad.
Do you have any snakes at home right now in Arizona where you're at? Any pets?
If I wanted to go out in the backyard, I could find you a bunch of them. No, I don't. We don't keep any pets here. I had one for years. I mean, it's when you're on the road, you basically live on the road. You don't really live anywhere. There was a period of time when we literally lived on the road for 6 years. If you were going to send me a letter, I would just go, well, we'll be at a Holiday Inn in Wisconsin in 2 weeks. So send it there. So the snake basically lived with us on the road. After every tour, we would put in a new snake. They would get to get retired and go to a petting zoo. And a couple of our snakes ended up in Indiana Jones movies.
Really?
So,
which ones?
Yeah. I think Kachina was one.
Wow.
And Eva Marie snake ended up in, when he falls in the pit and he goes, snakes, I hate snakes. Well, 2 or 3 of those were ours.
No way. These are full-on Hollywood A-lister snakes. My snake feels a bit intimidated.
Well, they have little sunglasses on, and
How did you get into snakes, or more specifically, making them a regular, part of the act, the Alice Cooper act?
At the time, people were so outraged at every single thing that we did that I was backstage and a girl had a snake smaller than this around her arm. And like everybody else, I jumped back because snakes have very bad PR since the Bible, and, and I went, well, wait a minute. If I jumped back because of this little snake, what would an audience do if I had a big snake on stage? So I had to get used to the idea of putting this boa constrictor around my neck. And it took half the tour before I would really trust the idea that finally I found out the snake's deaf. They're pretty much blind. They love the heat from the lights, and they love the sound of the bass and the drums. It's like the pulse. So they feel very comfortable on stage. The only thing they're worried about is you dropping them. That's the only thing that they have a fear of, is being dropped. So as long as you hold them and don't give off adrenaline, they're fine.
Mm-hmm. Obviously. What about your band members, though? You obviously are calm with it, but I've talked to Orianthi about this, and she has told me, at times when there'd just be like a snake sitting around backstage, it was weirding her out a bit. I mean, do you have trouble getting band members who are on board? Because like you said, snakes have bad PR. People think they're these awful, evil, dangerous creatures. Obviously, a snake can be in an Indiana Jones movie is going to be professional, keep it professional.
I swear they knew when they were on stage. I had snakes that were just boring as could be, just nothing. They'd get on stage and all of a sudden they were here and they were around my head, and they'd come over and they'd open their mouth and things like that. And as soon as the show's over, they would, of course, just go right back down to being,
Interesting. Didn't you say there was... Yeah, go ahead.
The band, most of the people in the band got so used to the snake, and they were pretty far away from it. And the snake was really only on stage for one song.
Yeah. Good job.
And then gone. Yeah. So.
Easy job.
Yeah.
You only have to do one song, go back to the dressing room. Didn't you once say you had one snake? I think it was Christopher, who was too nice, wasn't scary enough.
Yeah. There were some that were just sweethearts. They were just sweethearts. They were just kind of come up and they put their head on your cheek and just sit there and kind of kiss you, with the tongue and all that. And you'd go, okay, it's not very scary. But most people have a built-in fear of snakes. You can just see the audience coil back, when you see the snake like that. And the other half go, oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to see.
Yeah, that's me. So, yeah, you used to be in the pre-9/11 days, it was like that. It was actually like that movie where it's I'm tired of these mother effing snakes on a mother effing plane. You had snakes on a plane.
We had snakes. Maybe that was where the idea for the movie came from.
Maybe. All your snakes are in movies, so that could be. You should do a snake podcast. I feel like we're doing kind of one right now, but I know you're doing, you have a actual podcast going on now. Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, the cool thing about it was they came to me and they said, Vintage Vault, there's all these interviews of all these great people, Slash and Brian May and Ozzy and, Dave Grohl and Jimmy Page and all these people. And I've interviewed all of them on my radio show. And I've known them. Everybody that I've interviewed, I have had relationships with, backstage or on tour or whatever. And so I said, well, it's great to go into these interviews, these older interviews, and make comments on them and sort of tell backstage stories about that, or, giving them sort of an insight about this person that most people don't know. And I said, well, I'm the perfect person to do that, because I think, when you become sort of a elder statesman of rock, you get to do that. You sort of have the authority to do that. And I just have fun with it. I just have fun with it, especially, guys that are fun guys,
What's the favorite interview you've ever done? If you can narrow, or if you have more than one, you can name a couple.
I did an interview that was the craziest interview I ever did, was with Question Mark from Question Mark and the Mysterians.
Yeah.
Where he told me that he lived in Mars, and Jim Morrison and Elvis liked it there. Okay. And the air was food, and nobody wore clothes, and he was dead serious, and I'm going, my whole part of the interview was this. I was like a psychiatrist or something. I just let him go. And it just got crazier and crazier. And at the end, I went, I don't know if he was putting me on or not. And then I realized he wasn't.
Really? Really? So that sounds like not a bad place to live right now, I guess, with Question Mark, where the air is food. That sounds all right. That sounds all right. But you've like done so much in your career, and I now that we've got the snakes out of the way, there's just so many like random memories I want to ask you about. And one is something I've talked about with your Hollywood Vampires bandmate before, because there were two people that came out of the Sgt. Pepper movie smelling like a rose, not, their careers intact, and they were Aerosmith, who kicked ass, literally kicked ass, like Steven Tyler got in a fight with Billy Shears, and you doing Because, the big, brainwashing scene. I love this movie. It's actually literally the movie that introduced me to the Beatles as a kid, I don't know what that says about me, but that's how I discovered the Beatles music. Tell me, what memories do you have about, your scene was pretty cool and pretty creepy. I remember it scaring me as a kid.
Well, the thing about it was I had just gotten out of rehab. And I had a mustache. I never had a mustache before, but I had this big mustache. And I came out of rehab, and they said, we're doing Sgt. Pepper. And I said, oh, with the Beatles, that's going to be great. And they said, no, with the Bee Gees. And I immediately went, this is going to be a disaster, because you're talking about the Beatles' sacred record of all time. And the Beatles aren't in it, but the Bee Gees are. Now, I love the Bee Gees. I mean, I get along with those guys. I had a great time with them. But the general public are not going to stand for that. If the movie was Saturday Night Fever, then, the Bee Gees, all right, But it was one of those movies that ended up being so bad that it was great.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It was consistently horrible to the point where it was great. And they told me, you get to beat up the Bee Gees. There's a fight scene where you actually fight with them, and you get to work with George Martin. Now, that was the reason I did the movie, because I wanted to work with George Martin. And we got in, and here we are doing the Beatles' prettiest song. It's the prettiest thing the Beatles ever did, right? Because, right? And somehow at the end of it, George Martin says, I can't believe that you could turn the Beatles' prettiest song into a threat. And I said, well, the character is a villain. I said, so of course he's going to be this greasy, because the world is round. He's not going to do it nice. He's going to be this horrific character doing it. And he sent it to John, and John loved it. Lennon loved it because he thought it was just the opposite of what it was supposed to be. But the great thing about that movie was it really did turn the corner. And now if you look at it, you go, oh, this is so bad, it's wonderful.
So I feel like when that movie came out, I don't think it did as bad at the box office as people maybe think it did. I think it was a hit, but it was so critically panned. Did you regret at the time being part of it because, it didn't hurt your career the way it hurt some people's careers, but it didn't get a great response. Some people thought it was blasphemous, etc.
Well, first of all, like Aerosmith and Alice Cooper, we kind of are the dark side. We're the hard rock guys. What are we doing in this movie? And at the same time, Steve Martin. That was another one reason I wanted to be in it, because Steve Martin was in it. And if you look at the girl that dances in Maxwell Silver Hammer and the same girl that dances with Aerosmith, it's my wife, Cheryl.
Oh.
And Cheryl weighs about 90 pounds, and she's a little ballerina with little short hair, a little blonde hair. And she was in both those scenes. So,
were you dating her yet, or were you guys together yet? Or
we were married. Yeah.
Okay.
We were married. Yeah.
Very
for 1
cool.
year, we were married. Yeah.
It's interesting to me that you say that George Martin sent this track to John Lennon and got his approval got some feedback, because I have always wondered what the Beatles thought of that movie, because as you mentioned, they were not involved in it, and a lot of their hardcore purist fans were not down with it. So like, you actually know that the Beatles, at least John, like had some input or some, like, did they approve it? Like, if John had not liked your song, would it have been out of the film?
No, they first of all, John and I were pretty good friends. He was an original Hollywood vampire, and we, so he was in the drinking club. When he heard that song, he kind of expected, he said, Alice is doing it? Yeah. Oh, he knew it wasn't going to be their version of it. Even though the Bee Gees did a great version, all the beautiful background, all those voices, that was all the Bee Gees. And they treated it really well. And George Martin produced it well, so that the horrific, kind of greasy, horrific voice really popped out. It really was playing against the prettiness of it. And yeah, I know John, said, I would expect that from Alice.
It's such an interesting time. I think there were all these movie musicals that were just so bonkers. There was Xanadu, The Apple, The Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. The list goes on. The Apple was probably the most bonkers. The Village People movie. It seemed like between like 1978 and 1980, like everybody was trying to get in on this, like, movie musical. And maybe they were trying to do the next Grease. I don't know, but there were like some bonkers rock disco movies. And were you in any others at that time? I know you did TV. You did like The Muppet Show, which is like, another amazing thing.
Muppets. The Muppet Show was one of those things where, I watched, it was the number one show in the world because it was green people making fun of purple people. You know what I mean? And they weren't people. So everybody in the world loved that show. And it was very cleverly written, very well written. So I get a call and they go, how would you like to do the Halloween show? And I kind of balked at first. I went, oh man. I said, I've been spending all this time building this villain image. If this is just going to water it down, I said, well, who's going to be on it? Who was on like the last month? And they said, Christopher Lee, Vincent Price. And I went, I'm in. I didn't even have to think about it. I went, I am in. If those guys can do it, I am privileged to do it. I never had so much fun in my life as doing the Muppet Show. You rehearse for a week in London. And after a while, these Muppets were people. You were talking to them. What are you going to have for lunch today? Oh, I don't know. I was thinking about going down. And you're literally talking to them, and you catch yourself talking to this piece of felt like it's a real, because they would react exactly the way a person would react. Miss Piggy would say, well, do you want a Diet Coke? Because I know that you're not drinking now. And I went, yeah. I said, sure, that'd be. But
so they never broke character.
No, they never broke character.
They never just hung them up on the wall and, shattered your world or whatever.
They'd come into your dressing room, hey, you want some lunch? Yeah, Kermit, I'll be right there. I got it.
This sounds like the best experience ever. What other like TVs and movie like that? Like I said, I think it was a very golden era for sort of like variety TV and movie musicals and music and rock all combining into one crazy, all those variety shows like the Donnie and Marie shows. the Cher shows, all of them. Like, do you have any other memories of appearing in that, on those kind of things?
The idea was to always put Alice where he didn't belong. Always make Alice the character that should not be on the Smothers Brothers show, who should not be on Hollywood Squares, who should not be on this. I did a show called The Snoop Sisters with Helen Hayes and Mildred Nadwick. I mean, two classic British actresses.
Yeah.
And here they're detectives, and I'm sort of their connection to the underworld, But straight, I think my favorite thing was probably doing Gene Wilder's show. I did a show with Gene Wilder where it was a comedy, where it was live in front of an audience like a play. I was his noisy next door neighbor. And he ends up going to this party, coming home, and he's got my eye makeup on. He can't get it off. And it was a good 10 minutes of just Gene Wilder and I doing shtick. But I had to know timing. I had to know where I was going, where he was going. There was a live audience there. They couldn't redo it. They couldn't reshoot it. And I'm telling you, when you get to work with Gene Wilder,
wow,
it doesn't get better than that.
That's amazing. Well, you obviously have your podcast now, but were you ever approached to do, like, in this era, maybe like your own variety show or your own TV show, or maybe the rock star next door style, like, sitcom or whatever? I feel like that would have been some TV I would have wanted to see.
Yeah, and we turned most of that down only because we were touring at that time constantly. And it was at a time when Alice Cooper was at its peak. So it really didn't, if that were to come along later on, and I did. I did do a lot of stuff, the Wayne's World things and stuff like that later on. But I never wanted to be in a show where I had to, kind of totally lose the Alice character and become something else. I don't mind doing guest shots. It's fun. I got to, the way I met Johnny Depp was Dark Shadows. They wanted in that movie, they were going back to 1972, and they said, well, Alice, let's have Alice at this party. That's how I met Johnny, and that's how the Hollywood Vampires got started, right there. But that was fun to do a major movie with Tim Burton, people like that. Yeah.
What's going on with the Hollywood Vampires? What are any plans for another album? I mean, I know touring's sort of on hold at the moment, obviously, but What's up musically for the Hollywood Vampires?
Well, like anything else, it's August was supposed to be a full out 5-week tour in Europe. That's gone. That was going to be all the big festivals and everything like that. And right now, Johnny, I think, is in France with Jeff Beck. They're doing something. They did that song Isolation, that John Lennon song Isolation. Mm-hmm. And Joe Perry was doing, the thing in Vegas, with Aerosmith. And so we were all doing our own tours and coming back in August. But I guarantee you right now, Johnny's writing, I'm writing, Joe's writing. When we get back together, I wouldn't be surprised if we put an album together really quick, because there's going to be 45 songs to go through and then go right back out on tour again. That band is fun to work with. It really is fun. The band is so good.
Yeah, I saw you guys at the Roxy. You mentioned Wayne's World. I forgot about that. I know an anniversary that I think just happened. What was it again where you're like giving like a lecture about, like, you go in this academic thing? What was the subject that you were lecturing about?
It was Milwaukee. It was like, the governors and the mayors of Milwaukee were socialists, and actually it was all the fur traders are coming down from Canada, and I was sounded like I was on Jeopardy. And the funny thing was the fact that the band, were just as educated as I were, and that was the juxtaposition of the two guys sitting there going, I wasn't expecting that,
Did you have to study up for that, or are you like some Milwaukee geographer that I was unaware about?
Here was the deal. I got there. We were supposed to do Feed My Frankenstein, right? That was the big deal. They were going to go see Alice backstage, and that's all it was going to be. Was hi guys, blah blah blah. As soon as I got there, Mike Myers says, "You're an actor." He says, "Here's six pages of dialogue." And I said, when are we shooting this? And he goes, about 2 hours from now. So I memorized about a quarter of it and then just riffed on the rest of it.
Like made it up?
I was just starting to make things up out of nowhere, And what you didn't see on camera was you had Mike and Dana here doing everything they could to make me laugh. They wanted to make, and I picked a spot between them and delivered all the lines in between them. But if you would have heard the outtakes on the We're Not Worthy, it went on for about 7 or 8 minutes, and it got vile. It just got vile.
Oh my God! Where are these outtakes? Are they on a DVD or anything like that?
I guarantee you, Mike or Lauren has them. But if that ever gets out, I'm not in trouble, but they are.
I'm gonna try to find it. Well, as you can see, I'm very interested in this sort of like crossing over of when the 70s became the 80s and rock mixed with new wave and rock mixed with disco. And I do a podcast too. It's called Totally 80s. And the very first one we did was about rock stars that went new wave for an album or two. And we talked extensively and positively, I should add, about clones and about Flush the Fashion, the album in general, which I believe was built Alice Cooper 80, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Can we talk about that album for a minute? Because even though I don't know if a lot of people remember it, it actually was a hit. And people covered clones and stuff. Like, what made you want to do that experiment in 1980?
Well, I didn't want to take the guitars out of it. I wanted it to be a guitar rock album, as always. But it was the first time that I got a heavy dose of synthesizer. And it was because of Roy Thomas Baker. He produced the album. He produced Queen and Cars and everybody like that. And I said, I would like to do something that sounds modern, but doesn't lose Alice. I want to keep Alice in there. And he says, well, Alice could be sci-fi, can he? And I went, absolutely. Let's go sci-fi on this. So a lot of the songs on there, especially Clones, was very sci-fi, And I thought that was not a bad little offshoot for Alice to go, basically it was classic horror. Alice goes sci-fi on this one. And it was a hit. It was a top 10 hit and everything like that. But Roy Thomas Baker was the story in that album. If they ever make a movie about Nero or Caligula, Roy Thomas Baker at that period would have been the guy. Because at that time, he was the most decadent human being I'd ever met in my life. I'd get calls like this. I'd get calls like, Alice, darling, I'll be a little late. I seem to be handcuffed to my bed. I picked up a couple of chippies last night, and they stole my wallet. And I can't, is my Rolls Royce at your house? Because I can't find it. And it was just, I was not the insane one in that. Roy Thomas Baker was by far the most insane character that I'd worked with, and I loved him. I thought he was great because at the end I heard the album and I loved what he did with it. We cut it very sparsely. We cut it very, very, so that it was in your face and everything. And then his magic is in the mixing. When he mixes, he's got this thing that it sounds like Roy Thomas Baker. If you hear a Bob Ezrin production, it sounds like Bob Ezrin. If you hear a David Foster production, it sounds like David Foster. This was definitely Roy Thomas Baker. And I really liked it. I liked the picture on the back with the short hair. And It was very, very underground. Yeah.
Yeah, see, I'm happy to hear you say this because maybe, I don't know why I would have assumed this, but because it was, kind of like a little, maybe a slight detour from what you normally do. I didn't know if it'd be something that you're like, oh, that was an interesting experiment that I shouldn't have done, or that, was, a moment in time that I'm not going to return to. So, and I love that record. So, it's got great friggin' album song titles like Aspirin Damage. Like that sounds like a punk rock song to me. So like I'm glad to hear you talk about it positively, but what was the I know you had a hit off of it, but in general, what was the fans' response? Because, rock people, metal people, they can be very purist about things.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to bring them along. You have to just say, look, we're going here this time. And I think the next album, even, Special Forces and Zipper Catch a Skin, were albums that were without Bob Ezrin, where it was just myself and the band, and basically writing these trippy little songs that now I listen to. I don't remember writing them. I don't remember producing them. I don't remember touring with them. I might have been involved in the cocaine blizzard, that was going on in Los Angeles at the time. But now I listen to them and I go, wow, that song is so good. I almost am tempted to go back into those albums and reproduce some of those songs.
Yeah.
Because some of the songs were so clever that I hate to see them just disappear,
Do you actually have like gaps from that period in the early to mid 80s where you actually don't remember making those records?
I call them my blackout albums. I really don't remember touring with them, honestly. I look at pictures and I go, wow, what did I become? There were shots of me on the Special Forces album, especially, where the coke had done its damage. I was always able to go on stage and really entertain the audience. That was no problem. But I did one of those big shows, talk shows, and I was terrifying looking. It scared me. And to the point at the time where I wanted it to be, this guy should look like a soldier of fortune that's on meth and he's capable of killing anybody. And that's what he looked like. That Alice really was scary looking. When all that went away and Alice came back, I decided Alice should be a villain. Alice should not be the whipping boy. He was sober now. Let's make Alice, let's make Alice this really condescending sort of elegant villain.
Well, that is a role, obviously, you were in many ways born to play, because we, talked about Sergeant Pepper and all that. There's one, we're talking about movies a lot. So you'd mentioned Roy Thomas Baker, and he sounds like he should have his own movie. And obviously Queen, the band that he famously produced, had Bohemian Rhapsody. And it seems like every artist is now having a biopic made. And so, like, when's the Alice Cooper one happening? There's got to be one.
I hope it's not one of those ones where you have to die first,
Well, Elton John has one out that's great, and he's very much alive and kicking. So
they did that. Usually, it's going to happen with bands that were extremely commercially successful, whereas Alice was successful, and we sold a lot of records. But I did not appeal to everybody. I was there, I was definitely on the darker side, and I think that it would be a great movie, myself. And if Johnny Depp were just better looking, he could play me,
He would be so good for it, though. He obviously knows the subject so well. He's a great actor. Yeah, he could do it. Is that who you pick? Is that
I think Johnny would be the best guy to play me, yeah. Because he really likes to take those characters that nobody else wants to play, And he loves prosthetics. He would get my nose in there and, and the whole thing like that. And he knows me well enough now where he could imitate me pretty well, I'm pretty sure.
So is this in production? Is this something you actually, surely you've been, like, maybe not, like, gotten to as far as talking into casting or whatever, but surely you've been approached to do something like this.
There's always people that come up with their ideas and, hey, listen, I'd love to do this. There's been about 5 different plays that they want to do about Alice Cooper, and on and on and on, And until somebody actually comes in and say, here's the storyline, here's the cast, here's the director, here's the producer, you can't get excited until that happens. You could say, yeah, keep it going. Let's see where you go with this. But it may never happen. You never know.
There's a play up actually in Portland, I believe. It's called Shock Opera. Are you familiar with that? It's all women playing you guys.
Really?
It's like off Broadway, obviously, because it's in Oregon. But yeah, playing you and playing the GTOs as well.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
that's great. The GTOs were really unique because they were really all sweet girls. They were really, really nice girls. Miss Christine, of course, was my girlfriend for a while. And all these girls were just great LA chicks. And they all got together and lived together and did makeup and everything. And it just so happened to be at the time when we signed with Frank Zappa. And so we shared a lot of makeup and a lot of clothes together, because the Alice Cooper band was totally straight. But we had that glam edge where we didn't mind wearing a pair of black leather pants and a slip. But the slip was all bloody and ripped, and immediately the audience would go, "What happened?" You know, and we don't give them any explanation. It's just like, what?
Yeah, actually, it's funny. I haven't mentioned this yet, but I am co-authoring Mercy Fontenot's book. It's done. You're in it, of course. You're mentioned in it, and she speaks very highly of you, and you know she's a big fan. But you're definitely mentioned about the Frank Zappa days for sure. You know, she's led many lives. They need to make a movie about her.
I am so happy to hear that Mercy's still going. She was great. She was sort of the really way sarcastic. You know, she was the one that out of the side of her mouth. Yeah, right. You know.
Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
I spent 2 years doing interviews with her for this book. I can assure you that nothing's changed, but she'll be so excited when I tell her that I spoke with you and that you had nice things to say. So, and also, the scene where she comes out of the cake in your party, that's in the book. That's a highlight.
Well, the GTOs were so connected to us because it was Frank Zappa's, you know, sort of like here's all my proteges. You know, it was it was us and the GTOs, and I mean, you know, it was all the freaks that no other record company would touch. And that was basically it. We were the throwaways. And later on, you know, I mean, we got discovered Bob Ezrin found us, and it became a commercial success because he knew how to put us into a package that made it work, you know.
Actually, that's a good point. So were you, before you connected with, was it Straight Records or Bizarre Records, Zappa's Straight Records? Like, were you trying a lot and just pretty much being rejected by every other label there was? Like, how'd that come about?
Nobody would touch us. They wanted the next Three Dog Night. They wanted the next Crosby, Stills and Nash. You know, they wanted that. And here we were. We didn't even like hippies. You know what I mean? We may have been in the hippie generation, but we had no problem with a little violence, you know, a little sex and violence up on stage.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a little, it was a lot, you know. And it really basically scared anybody on LSD would have just run out of the room. You know. In fact, one of my favorite things were you'd play a big festival with all these big bands, and you'd hear 1 hour Grateful Dead. You know, they make the announcement, 400,000 people. In 3 hours, Jefferson Airplane, and then it goes, warning. If you're on the brown acid, Alice Cooper is on in 5 hours. Please do not watch the stage. And I used to go, I love that. It was the greatest thing because, you know, we were the opposite of everything that was going to happen that day. Peace and love. We were not peace and love.
No.
You know.
That's amazing. So that sort of brings me full circle to the record you put out, an EP you put out last year, which was the Detroit cover. I forget what the exact title was, but it was the EP of all the Detroit cover songs. Can you tell me a little bit of Breadcrumbs? Yes, sorry, thank you. What made you want to revisit those artists and do something like that? It was awesome, by the way. I loved it. It was great.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was all Detroit players. We did everything in Detroit. That was my hometown, was Detroit. And I thought it was a great idea. Bob and I said, let's do an album that's going to be dedicated to hometown, because there were so many great bands back then. Detroit was the capital for hard rock. It was the Stooges, the MC5, Alice Cooper, Ted Nugent, and the Amboy Dukes, Bob Seger. You know, it went on and on and on. If you were a hard rock band, you didn't come from New York or LA. You came from Detroit. And that's what I was proud of, the fact that I was one of those bands that came out of Detroit. And I said, well, let's now focus an album just on Detroit. And so we said, well, we can't put this album out till next year, not knowing that there was a plague coming. And let's do this little EP, and we'll call it Breadcrumbs, because it'll lead the audience into the next album.
Oh.
And so what we did was we went and saw all these great punk bands in Detroit. Really great bands, the Electric Six, and all these really great punk bands. And we covered 2 or 3 of their songs, and they're going, "Why are you covering the Dirt Bombs?" And I said, "Because it needs to be covered. It works perfectly into the song. Let's put it in there." And these punk bands were going, they were like shaking their heads, going, "Why?" I said, "Because you're Detroit. That's why. You're the essence of Detroit. You were what we were in the 60s and 70s.
Wow. And what do you think it is about Detroit? Because, you were talking about how when the Alice Cooper band came up, you were the antithesis of the late 60s, peace and love stuff that was prevalent. And then a couple of the other bands you just mentioned, the Stooges and MC5, very much were not doing the peace and love thing then either, 50 years ago. When
we were in LA, the Doors ran LA. The Doors were and probably the Buffalo Springfield were the 2 big bands, and the Doors were great because they were LA sex. I mean that you couldn't put it any more different. That was there's San Francisco was this funky country kind of rock. New York had their sound, and we didn't fit into any one of those. When we went to Detroit and played this big festival, and I'd never seen Iggy before. I'd never seen the MC5. I'd never heard of them. And we got on stage with those guys. We fit in so perfectly that was we realized this is where we belong. And it was my hometown to start with, so that even made it better, the fact that I was a hometown boy. Mm-hmm. So, we moved right in, played the Rocks. I mean, they played the East Town every week and the Grandy with all these great bands. And I never felt more at home than I did in Detroit. And I never felt at home in LA. Never felt at home in New York. Always felt at home in Detroit, though.
What do you think it is about Detroit that sort of was the ground zero, the breeding ground for like that anti-hippie groundswell?
Kids, the kids did not go home and say, "Okay, there's a Stooges concert tonight. Let's go put on our black leather jackets and our Levi's." That's what they wore. That was their everyday dress. And they didn't have to dress up to go to the show. That was what they looked like, And Mom and Dad both worked in the factories. Mm-hmm. And so it was an industrial city. There was nothing sophisticated about Detroit. Motown and hard rock. And that was really street. Everything was very street level. And that's why I just felt that we really fit in there. I could not do an album that didn't have that Detroit guts to it, Mm-hmm. When you feel at home like that, and every band was cheering for the other bands. They weren't trying to outdo the other bands. Stooges were cheering for Alice Cooper. We were cheering for the MC5. It was a real fraternity, a real rock fraternity, because I think we felt like the underdogs.
Yeah. So you said that was supposed to be just some breadcrumbs. So when do we get the loaf? When's more coming?
Detroit Stories is done. It's all done. And the song that's out now, that's Don't Give Up, is a song that at the end we decided, we never saw this coming. We never saw this whole thing coming. And mm-hmm. I said, we need to write a song that addresses that. Don't give up. Hey, we're tougher than this thing. It's tough, but we're tougher. Remember, we're the blood and guts human race. We're tougher than this little germ. And it just fit right into what we were doing on the album. So,
So when's that coming out? Do you have a date yet? For
the 15th. Yeah. 15th, it comes out with a little video, and, it's really, really, really a cool song. And for once, it's not Alice scaring you. It's Alice encouraging you, but in
Well,
a sort of a dark way, you know.
I would expect nothing less. Well, on that note, my last question for you is, we need leadership in this country right now. And in 2016, you were putting something out there that, like, I mean, I know it was sort of done tongue in cheek, but it was Alice Cooper for president. 4 years later, can we revive that campaign? Can we get you Alice Cooper 2020?
We have shirts that say, "Don't blame me. I voted for Alice." I hate politics more than anything.
Oh.
I am just, elected, when Elected came out, it was a total goof on politics. It was, and John Lennon, that was John's favorite song because it was a great satire on all politics. Mm-hmm. And I told him, though, I said, John, I'm not political. I said, if there's anything coming from me, it's going to be satire. It's not going to be serious. Mm-hmm. So I just don't know if rock and politics belong in bed together. I know that rock, horror, and comedy belong in bed together. I have never been political. I don't think what Bono does and what Sting does and what Springsteen does, I think that's humanitarian. I don't think that's political. So I stay as far away from politics as I possibly can. It's the most boring thing in the world to me.
I still would vote for you. Writing candidate maybe for 2020. We'll see how the rest of this year pans out. But I have had such a good time talking to you. So is Whitesnake. She says, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
This was a real treat for her. She feels like a rock star now, Tell your snakes, say hello when you are reunited with them. And I'm going to tell Mercy you say hello. I don't know.
Say hi to Eric Dover, too. I haven't seen Eric in a while.
Friday. I don't even know what date it is. On Friday, he has because he was in Jellyfish. Him and two of the other guys who were in Jellyfish with him, Roger Manning and Tim Smith, they're putting out a record, not as Jellyfish, under a name called the Licorice Quartet. It's very Jellyfish, though. It's very that. And that's what I was interviewing him about. But I'll definitely tell him you say hi. He spoke very highly of you, as everyone does. So. Well,
he is one of the most talented human beings on this planet. Eric Dover is. I mean, the guy is really amazing. He needs to have a hit. Well, this record might, we'll see. I mean, what Jellyfish do is, like you say, it's not for, just like any good music isn't for everyone. It's that power pop thing, but it's super good. So I will tell him that my snake this whole time has been getting up in my business. I will tell him that you say hi. I'll tell Mercy you say hi. I don't know, maybe at some point, I don't know when the book's coming out. I might reach out to your camp to get some kind of blurb or something for the jacket, but that probably won't be till next year. But hopefully I'll see you before then. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. That was fun.